Brazil is the only team in history to dispute all editions of the World Cup. And that's why today, we're going to go through literally all the participation of Amaralina in cups. From moments of glory to failures, going through those cups that time ended up forgetting. The first World Cup and the first Brazil Cup was in 1930. But in those early days of football, it was not possible to say that things were very organized. The Paulista and Carioca federations were at war, which made the Paulistas not want to send any of their players to the cup. And so basically we only had players from Carioca teams representing Brazil. And that's why our first World Cup in Uruguay was not very cool, with Brazil suffering a defeat in the debut for Yugoslavia. And then, even putting a 4-0 win over Bolivia, Brazil was eliminated in the group stage. We have few images at that time, but you can see there at least the crack Arakan Patuska, which was one of the important names of that Brazil, and also our goalkeeper in that cup with 3 goals. Preguinho, a very Brazilian nickname. It comes to 1934, and the former CBF's precursor didn't learn anything, and this time he didn't even want to take professional players too. Italy, filling the team with amateur players, right at a time when Brazil was starting to professionalize its football, but had those who were against, in order not to have a very bad team. In the end, they managed to kind of hire some professional players, including the legendary Leonidas da Silva, the Black Diamond, who made our only goal in this cup. But it didn't help. With zero preparation and a long boat trip of almost 2 weeks, Brazil played only one match, taking 3-1 from Spain, and was eliminated right in the first phase. For the 1938 Cup in France, they decided to call the professionals even though the team was made up of practically all players from Carioca clubs. Leonidas da Silva was still the whites. Crack. Yes, our main uniform was white at the time. The yellow would arrive only later. And Leonidas scored 3 goals in a crazy 6-5 against Poland in the first game, right in the round of 16. And legend has it that he scored one of the goals barefoot. Exactly. He ended up losing the boot in a shot. The referee didn't notice, let it roll, and only in the middle of the half he scored one of the goals of the match. The boot ended up in the alligator's mouth. It peeled off the sole of the upper part. I couldn't keep that, so I took it off and threw the boot away, and I stayed in the play. The ball hit the barrier. It came back to me. I took advantage of the shot, and I scored. Brazil then tied with Czechoslovakia in the quarterfinals with another goal from Leonidas, and then beat them in a second tiebreaker game with another goal from the guy. However, the team fell in the semis to Italy, taking 2-1 with a goal from Giuseppe Meazza, idol of Inter Milan, who gives the name to the San Siro Stadium. Brazil then won the third place match against Sweden, but even with Leonidas leaving the top scorer with 7 goals scored and recognized as the best player in the tournament, this was not the moment for the team to shine on the biggest stage of football. But it was starting to warm up. Brazil was already showing something more interesting, and Diamante Negro, perhaps our first great national idol in football, already showed that Brazil had the potential to become a star. We then have a stop due to the Second World War, and the first post-war cup in 1950 was precisely in Brazil. In this edition, there was a format with 2 group stages. In the first, Brazil took Mexico and scored 4-0, then faced Switzerland and tied for 2-2, and then guaranteed the classification by scoring 2-0 over Yugoslavia. The second group stage was a kind of quadrangular that whoever finished first would be champion. Brazil scored a 7-1 against Sweden, where our crack Ademir scored 4 goals, and then took Spain and applied a great 6-1 with Ademir shining again. With these 2 goals in a row, Brazil was very favorite. It was running over everyone, and in the last game it only needed a draw against Uruguay to be world champion. And this match would be played in Maracana, a gigantic stadium built even for this cup. To improve, Ademir, according to some accounts, reached the final with 9 goals and 7 assists in the account. Quietly, the tournament crack. The newspapers were already singing victory, and there was a great pride in the air that Brazil would beat Uruguay without any difficulty. But what promised to be an absurd party ended up becoming one of the saddest moments in the history of Seleção when Brazil went to the biggest game in the history of the national team at the time, to Americana that, by some sources, had almost 200,000 people, the largest audience in the history of the Cups to date, and was defeated by 2x1 in what was known as the Maracanazo, and lost the title that was in his hands. It was a disappointment that caused a huge reformulation in the national team, with the color of the uniform even coming out of the white for the now traditional yellow. In 1954, in Switzerland, Brazil would have another cup where it was more figurative than protagonist. In the first group stage game, the team, already very different from 50, beat Mexico by 5-0 with 3 assists from Didi and also a goal with dribble from Julino. Then he tied 1-1 against Yugoslavia, and so it went to the tiebreaker. Only then, in the quarterfinals, Brazil would face Hungary in a famous and so violent game that it became known as the Battle of Bern. Brazil started by taking 2 bushes in 10 minutes, and then Julino even scored a beautiful goal that left the score 3-2, with Brazil putting 2 balls in the net in sequence in what could be a 3-3, but in the end, with 2 goals from Sandor Kocsis, legendary Hungarian who scored 11 goals in this cup. The team ended up losing both in the fight and on the field to that generation of Hungarian gold for 4-2. And to make matters worse, at the end of the game there was still a discussion, a fight, and Brazil left a very bad image. We arrive in Sweden for the 1958 World Cup, when Brazil would have its first big moment in football. Even without the presence of the 17-year-old boy Pelé, who was injured in the tournament, Brazil beat Austria and tied with England. In the last group stage game against the Soviet Union, we had Pelé's debut in the World Cup. He came back injured, playing as a midfielder in a team that also had Gilmar in goal, de Sorbonne. The right side, Bellini and Orlando on the wings, and Newton Santos on the left side. Zito and Didi formed the midfield, and in front, in addition to Pelé, there was Garrincha on the right, Zagallo on the left, and Vava in the center forward. In the clash between Yashin and Pelé, it was Vava who shone, scoring both goals of the match, and Brazil advanced to the quarterfinals against Wales in a match that was not easy, and only in the second half. The king was really born in the World Cups, scoring his first goal in a spectacular way. He kills a shot in the chest, gives a touch to shoot from the defender, and sends a runner to guarantee the victory by 1-0. The semifinal was against France, by the goalkeeper Just Fontaine, but who opened the scoreboard was another goalkeeper, Vava, right at the beginning. Then Fontaine tied up next and increased his artillery. Didi put Brazil back in front with a goal in the corner, and it was in the second half that King Pelé scores a goal just pushing in after the rebound of the goalkeeper. Then he leaves one more dot shooting the ball inside the area and completes his triplet, dominating the thigh and without dropping it, putting a kick to the back of the goal. France still decreased, but there was no way. At 17, Pelé scored 3 goals in a World Cup semifinal, and with 5-2, Brazil was in the decision. The final was against the Swedish host, but Brazil came in very well and was the favorite. Even leaving behind the scoreboard, there was Vava's star, tying and then turning in 2 plays, practically identical to Garrincha. And that's when Pelé scores one of his anthological goals of his career. He received a launch, dominates in the chest, puts a hat on the defender, and shoots 2. Score one of the most beautiful goals ever recorded in a World Cup. There's another goal from Zagallo, and then another from Pelé in which he starts the play by touching the heel and runs to the area to make a header, and close to 5-2 that gave Brazil the title of world champion for the first time in its history, not only projecting Brazil to the world through football, but helping the country to overcome a kind of complex that had gained strength after the defeat of 50. Then comes the 1962 World Cup, and now Brazil sought to defend its title in Chile, and with high expectations, because in addition to the rest of the team, Pelé was now the best player in the world. The first match was against Mexico, who always suffered for Brazil in the World Cup, and the Brazilian favoritism prevailed with a show from the king. The first goal came in a cross from him to a little fish from Zagallo, and in the second, Pelé scored a great goal after winning half the opposing team in strength and speed. The second game was a 0-0 against Czechoslovakia, but the worst was not the result, but Pelé's injury, which was out of the rest of the competition. Off the field, he saw Brazil beat Spain in the Puskas with 2-1, with 2 goals from Amarildo, who was precisely Pelé's substitute for this match. In fact, the second goal comes in an absurd play from the unstoppable Garrincha, which gave the tone of what would be Manet's World Cup. In the quarters against England by Bobby Charlton, Kobe Garrincha took the lead in the 3-1 victory with 2 goals from him and also an assist. In addition to being this the game in which a little dog enters the field, dribbles Garrincha, and then he would end up being adopted by Mané. In the semis against the host Chile, Garrincha once again decided, with Brazil winning 4-2, with a great goal from the man, another goal from his head, another assist for Vava, and then Vava also closing the scoreboard. Garrincha laid down and rolled and even was expelled in this game, but miraculously, and in a way that until today was not very well explained, they released him to play the final. The decision was against Czechoslovakia when the story of the last final was repeated. Brazil started losing with a goal from Massapusti, but soon after Amarildo tied with a goal without angle, and he himself then gives assistance to Zito's goal. In the end, Vava takes advantage of a goalkeeper's foul to close the scoreboard, and so Brazil was runner-up in the World Cup with 14 players who were also in 58, and now won the trophy for the second time, and with Garrincha, of course, eternalizing himself as a national hero. Now for the 1966 World Cup in England. The current Brazilian runner-up was by far the big favorite, but this brought exaggerated confidence, and much because of this arrogance. Everything went wrong. For the first game against Bulgaria, the escalation still had Pelé and Garrincha, the great stars of the team, who even scored the foul goals, one of each, in the 2-0 victory. Only after being kicked in every possible way in this game, Pelé felt pain, and so was blamed in the next match against Hungary, which was a deserved 3-1 defeat in a game that for the Hungarians and for the neutral audience was historic at the time. The game against Portugal de Eusebio would be the last of the group stage and decisive. Pelé came back, but coach Vela decided to make 9 changes in the team that lost to Hungary, even took Garrincha off the field, and so the Black Panthers scored 2 goals. Portugal beat Brazil by 3-1, and the team then was eliminated early from the World Cup. Now for the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, the runner-up as a player Zagallo was now the coach, and he took over the team just before the World Cup and set up the team that became known as the Squadrão. Felix in goal, Captain Carlos Alberto on the right, Brito and Piazza on the wings, and Everaldo on the left side. In the middle, there was Clodoaldo, Gerson, and Rivellino also playing a hybrid role. But on the left side, and in front, Pelé, Gersinho, and Tostão. In the first game against Czechoslovakia, there is the iconic goal that Pelé did not make in the 4-1 victory, which also had his goal and 2 goals from Gersinho. And then in the great game against the current champion, England, Brazil won by 1-0 with another goal from Gersinho, and the famous defense of the century from Gordon Banks in a header from Pelé. In the last group stage game, Brazil wins again, scoring 3-2 against Romania, with 2 from Pelé and 1 from Gersinho. While in the quarters against Peru, it's 4-2 again with a goal from Gersinho for Brazil to reach the semis against Uruguay, in a game that would serve to scare another ghost, since it was the first time that the two countries faced each other in the Cup since the disappointment in the final of 50. The Uruguayans even opened the scoreboard, but it was another victory of the squad, a 3-1, counting with a goal from Gersinho again in a fulminant draw, and another iconic move when at the end of the match, Pelé dribbles the goalkeeper without touching the ball, but sends it out. Scoring another goal there that Pelé did not do. The final against Italy would decide who would be the first 3-time champion, and it was Pelé who opened the scoreboard, and in the celebration. It was even Gersinho generating one of the most iconic images in the history of football. After a bizarre exit of the goalkeeper Felix, Bonin Senna tied for the Italians, but in the second half, Gerson Canotina de Oro put Brazil in front again, and Pelé scored for Jairzinho to expand. And then, if you noticed well, I made a point of saying all the goals of Jairzinho because he scored in all the games of Brazil in this World Cup. There was still time for another pass for Pelé's goal, now playing for captain Carlos Alberto Torres, who closed the account in that historic and collective goal that sacrificed 4-1 and Brazil from the squadron 3-time world champion, a victory that was widely used politically by the Brazilian military dictatorship at the time, and the first time that the Brazilian people saw live Brazil champion on TV, okay? Before it had only been on the radio, or only the recording of the games after they had already happened. Now for the 1974 World Cup in Western Germany, Brazil had no more very important players of the trio, like Pelé, Gerson, Tostão, and Carlos Alberto. The team was led by Rivellino, and still had the whole Jairzinho, but it starts shy, escaping to lose to Yugoslavia and staying in a tie of 0-0 also against Scotland. The victory only came at the end of the group stage, 3-0 over Zaire, where Rivellino left him with a bomb from outside the area. The second part of the World Cup was again that crazy scheme of another group stage, and Rivellino scored the historical goal of the victory by 1-0 against Eastern Germany in a game in which Brazil was bad, and Rivellino also opened the scoreboard 2-1 against Argentina. But Brazil, who made a contestable World Cup, was criticized, called pragmatic, and without brilliance, was on the way to be dominated by the Dutch carousel, losing by 2-0 with beautiful goals from Johan Cruyff and Neskens. This Netherlands that would not win the World Cup, but it was the team that most enchanted in that edition. We even have a video just about the Netherlands of 1974. It's worth watching. At that moment, no one knew yet, but this slow participation of Brazil in this World Cup would be just the beginning of the biggest fast in our history. The 1978 World Cup in Argentina is not the most traumatic participation of Brazil in the World Cup, but it is perhaps the one that has the greatest sense of injustice. The national team came completely remodeled in relation to the 1970 try, with Rivellino still being a big name, but with an experienced reserve only. And again, Brazil started the World Cup with difficulties, drawing with Sweden in the opening until Zico rose to the top and turning off the lights to give victory to Brazil. However, this is that absurd move in which the referee whistled the end of the game with the ball in the air, with Zico about to head, a complete injustice. And if Brazil had won this game, maybe it would have gone to another group in the next phase, and the story would be different. Then the team was tied against Spain by 0-0, but almost lost in the final. And the thin victory against Austria with a save goal from Dynamite put the team in the second phase of groups, which started with a 3-0 victory over Peru in the first game. In the second, there was a direct confrontation against Argentina. Whoever won would probably go to the end of the World Cup. The match was ugly and violent, and the result was 0-0. But there was one game left for each team, and the decision would be in the goal balance. Because Brazil beat Poland by 3-1, and the only scenario that eliminated Brazil and classified Argentina was a victory of the brothers over Peru for more than 4 goals apart. And that's how, in a very suspicious way, Argentina, living in a military dictatorship at the time, scored 6-0 over Peru and qualified for the final in place of Brazil. To this day, there are suspicions that Peru's players were subordinated, and also reports that the Argentine dictator at the time made a visit to Peruvian players before the game. While in Brazil, the coach of the national team and former military man Coutinho was accused of being a fantoche who obeyed orders from above, including the escalation of the players. Brazil was then eliminated from this cup in an unbeaten way, but with that little taste that it could be. More because of all this suspicion of weak football and also of this very different regulation that the cup had at the time. And for the 1982 World Cup, maybe Brazil didn't have such a good team. In this way, since the 1970s, the team was commanded by Tele Santana off the field and by Zico inside it, and is still considered one of the best in the history of the Cups. In the group stage, Brazil scored 2-1 over the Soviet Union, with a goal from Socrates and a fantastic cross from Falcao. Then came the 4-1 against Scotland, and still a 4-0 over New Zealand, with Zico putting the guys in the pocket, with 2 goals and 2 assists. With these victories, the team gained body and favoritism. Brazil scored goals convinced, and Zico himself, Socrates, Falcao, and others became stars of that cup. And then, in the second group stage, a 3-1 to consecrate the revenge against the current Argentine champions in a game that even had the expulsion of Maradona in the end. But then came the infamous tragedy of Sarriá, when Brazil just needed to tie to advance in the stage. The confidence of the people was at the height with the possible tetra, but as we've seen in other cups, too much confidence is bad. And then the Italian striker Paolo Rossi destroyed Brazil with 3 goals in the decisive game. The defeat by 3-2 caused the elimination of the national team, and even so, for the great football he presented in the cup, Canarino was celebrated by the people around Brazil, which moved the coach Tele Santana at the time. In 1986, in Mexico, Brazil came with problems for the cup. Renato Gaucho was excluded from the World Cup for indiscipline, and the left-back Leandro became friendly with him and did not appear for the national team. Socrates and Junior were not at 100%, while Zico made it impossible to recover from injury in time and play the cup. To make matters worse, the political dispute at CBF made the planning of the national team have been horrible, and the team had little place determined to train therein. Mexico. Even so, it would be another positive start for Canarino, now with guys like Casagrande and Careca, with the team doing 1-0 against Spain at the opening, in a victory that was very difficult, even more because the referee did not validate a cool goal from Spain, and also 1-0 against Algeria, and then ended the group stage putting 3-0 in Northern Ireland. To improve in the round of 16, he beat Poland 4-0. So there were 4 victories in this cup, no goal even taken to not give anything, because in the quarters against France in Platini, the then injured Zico got in the middle of the game, lost a penalty, and the game ended 1-1. Alternate draws, Brazil lost 2, and still had a chance, since a call from France was in the lock dot and came back on the back of the goalkeeper before entering, and so Brazil was eliminated early once again. It was the last game of Galeno with the yellow card, who left the national team to, in the minds of many, be the villain of the elimination. For the 1990 World Cup, Brazil came under pressure with several extra field problems, with the concentration of the national team becoming a go and come of relatives, businessmen, and others, with the sports press prevented from entering there, with players fighting to receive higher awards, and with a World Cup break that would complete 20 years. The coach, Lazzaroni, was very questioned for setting up a cowardly and moody team, and once again, Brazil still won all the group stage games, with slim victories against Sweden, Costa Rica, and Scotland. But soon in the round of 16 against Argentina, Brazil played better, scored 3 goals in the lock, but Canidia opened the score for the brothers at the end, after an absurd play from Maradona. And with 1-0, Brazil was eliminated and was increasingly distant from the glory. That, of course, until 1994 in the United States. It was 24 years since the 70s Trident, the biggest fast in the history of the Brazilian team, and it seemed that the fast would continue, because in the qualifiers, Brazil suffered a lot and only qualified for the cup in the last game, when Romario was called and saved Brazil. Today we remember the glorious Tetra of 1994, but the fact is that Brazil arrived discredited. Even so, in the group stage, Pereira's team went without so many difficulties, putting 2-0 in Russia, 3-0 in Comoros, and drawing 1-1 against Sweden. Romario, the savior of the qualifiers, scored in all these games. In the round of 16, Brazil took the hosts, United States, who closed in defense, Brazilian Leonardo was expelled in the first half after an aggression. Romario missed a goal that we do not imagine that he could lose, but after sweating a little to break the American iron, Bichinho himself took a big step for Bebeto to define the victory by 1-0 in the quarters against Holland. Romario scored, and Bebeto became eternal, scoring a goal and making that famous and legendary celebration, packing the baby, in reference to his son who would be born later and would also become a player. Holland tied in 2-2, and Brazil only passed the phase because of a legendary goal by Branco in which the ball only came in because Romario had the reflex to take his ass out of the ball's path. If it was the rookie there, that goal would not have come out. The semifinal was against Sweden. And again Romario lost a goal after dribbling the goalkeeper, but after Sweden has an expelled player, Bichinho rose his head to consecrate the sweaty victory of Brazil by 1-0. The team then finally returned to a World Cup final, and just like the final of '70 against Italy. Would define the first three-time world champion. In '94, the decision against them would define who would be the first Tetra champion team. Both teams had solid defenses, and Italy had the duo Maldini and Baresi, two of the best defenders in the history of football, but it was Brazil who sought the attack the most, with Romario receiving a free ball on the second stick and sending it out. I highlighted Romario's mistakes during the World Cup for us to realize that even the greatest stars are human and fail, and that in a way the opposite can also happen. Even the most failed teams and humans, like the one in Brazil that had a lot of difficulties before the World Cup and got discredited, can also be champions. That's because the game ended 0-0, and in the penalties, luck didn't smile. Baresi sent his penalty on the moon. Massaro stopped at Tafarel, and the crack Roberto Baggio completed the party of the Brazilian fans. The team was finally the first world Tetra champion, and Dunga, who had been marked as the face of the boring team of '90, now raised the cup as captain. Arriving in '98, the best player of the previous World Cup, Romario, had a small injury and was cut. He was quite upset because he was sure he would be able to play again in the final part of the World Cup, and yet he was not taken. Still, Brazil had strong names, with some remaining of the champion team in '94, like Tafarel, Bebeto, and Cafu, and new stars like Roberto Carlos, Rivaldo. And of course their main one, who had been in '94 but without playing, Ronaldo Fenomeno. This Zagallo team then beat Scotland in the debut by 2-1 and then Morocco by 3-0. And even with the defeat to Norway in the last group stage game, he qualified for the round of 1-6, scoring 4-1 against the Chileans in a game that had a double of Ronaldo Fenomeno and also of Cesar Sampaio. Then Brazil beat Denmark in the quarterfinals with the brilliance of Rivaldo, who scored 2 goals, and Ronaldo, who scored 2 assists. And then he reached the final in an epic way after drawing with Holland by 1-1. And in the penalties saw Tafarel's star shine, with the goalkeeper taking the penalties of Cocu and Ronaldo de Boer. Brazil was the finalist for the second time in a row. The decision would be against France, who, despite never having arrived in a cup final before, had a good team led by cracks Ndani, and Brazil did not count with Ronaldo's convulsion. Fenomeno got sick just before the final was put to play without being in his best state, made an unrecognizable final, and saw another crack, Zizou obliterate Brazil with 2 goals in the head, before Petit closed the scoreboard. 3-0, Brazil was vice for the first, and until today only time, in a demoralizing defeat with Pentas. Dreams staying for later. Regardless of the result, it was in 2 consecutive cups that Brazil showed strength, reaching the final. So for 2002, even with a suffered classification, it was not possible to doubt Celesta, even because of the team we had in terms of names. It was Marcos in goal, Edmilson, Lucio, and Roca Jr. in defense, Cafu and Roberto Carlos in the wings, with Gilberto Silva, Ronaldinho, and Juninho Paulista in midfield, with Juninho being replaced by the most defensive Kleberson throughout the tournament, and in front, simply Rivaldo and Ronaldo phenomenon, with R9 returning to the cup after a very serious knee injury that had taken him out of the team for almost 3 years. In the group stage, there were only victories a 2-1 sweaty over Turkey, a 4-0 against China, and then a 5-2 against the Costa Ricans with a spectacular goal by Edmilson to classify Brazil for the round of 16 against Belgium. Even long before there was the great Belgian generation, this was already a very complicated game for Brazil, with Belgium having a bad goal on the side and the team only opening the scoreboard in the middle of the second half in a goal by Rivaldo, with Ronaldo then closing the 2-0. The fourth game would be against England by Beckham and Michael Owen, who even opened the scoreboard in a bizarre failure by Lucio. But then the star of Ronaldinho Gaucho, shown with a great pass for Rivaldo to tie, and then one of the most iconic moves of Brazil in the World Cup, when the wizard takes a foul from far away straight to the goal and covers the goalkeeper with an anthological goal, classifying the yellow card for the semifinals. We have a video just about Ronaldinho's career from start to finish. It's worth watching. In the semifinal, Brazil would take Turkey again, with the novelty now being the legendary Corte Cascao that the phenomenon debuted in this game in a joke of his that ended up becoming a tactic for people to talk about his hair and not the small injury he had suffered. It was also in this game that we had the famous escape of Denilson against 4 Turks. Brazil didn't have an easy life, but Ronaldo made it 1-0 in a corner goal. And so Brazil was classified for its 3rd World Cup final in a row. It was the first time that the biggest finalists of the World Cup, Brazil and Germany, faced each other in the decision. And this outcome, everyone knows what it was. A kick from Rivaldo generates a rebound from Kahn at Ronaldo's feet, who opens the scoreboard. And then a wonderful light cut from Rivas for Ronaldo to make his second. And so Brazil scored 2-0 and was world champion, showing that his name would continue at the top of football. Cafu raised the cup as the only player to dispute 3 World Cup finals in a row, and immortalized himself. But just like the 70, in this moment of joy, the Brazilians barely knew that this would also be the beginning of a very long fast. For 2006, the then Brazilian champion came with a very strong base, with several remaining from 2002, but in a complicated situation. Ronaldo and Adriano Imperador came out of shape, Ronaldinho arrived tired, and to make matters worse, the preparation of the team in the small city of Wigas was more a party of players and guests than anything else, with Roberto Carlos in the future calling this preparation a farce. Even so, the cast was spectacular, and the magic square of the attack put Brazil as the favorite. In the group stage, Amarelino won his 3 games against Croatia, Australia, and Japan, and in the round of 16 won from Ghana, but with something uncomfortable. The performance was far from expected. The team's football was criticized. Ronaldinho Gaucho could not play as the best in the world he was at that time, and the magic square really didn't work together. And when the quarterfinals against France arrived, all of this was messed up because once again Zidane was Brazil's Carrasco. He gave a show on the field in a legendary performance and gave the pass to Henry's goal in a grotesque mistake of the Brazilian defense, which caused once again an early elimination for a generation considered gold. The coach Pereira would later say that the team came to this cup with a full belly after having already won PENTA 4 years before. There was no hunger. Then comes 2010 in South Africa, and unlike the previous edition, the expectation was no longer so high, since several of those stars like Ronaldo and Ronaldinho were no longer called. Adriano was left out, and the young Ganso and Neymar appointed as the future of the team, and who were shining a lot in Brazil, were also not called. In addition, Coach Dunga made the team play in a more pragmatic way.